Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications. The following program is a production of Chilling Entertainment and the creative team at Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, and a proud member of the Simply Scary Podcasts Network. Visit simplyscarypodcast.com to learn more about this and our other weekly storytelling programs. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Good evening. I'm storyteller Otis Jiry, and I ain't your grandfather. From where I'm from, we don't do bedtime stories. And if that's what you were expecting, you're in the wrong place. If it's terrifying tales you're after, well then, I've got just the thing. Get comfortable, settle in, turn off the lights, if you dare. Your night is about to get a whole lot darker. Who needs sleep anyway?
Good evening, friends, and welcome back to Scary Stories Told in the Dark. I'm your host, Otis Jiry, and I'm joined tonight by my sharp-witted fellow traveler through strange lands and darker times, Malcolm Blackwood.
Good to be here, Otis, especially for this one, because tonight's episode is something special. A blast from the past, quite literally.
That's right. Every tale you're about to hear tonight comes from the legendary pages of Weird Tales magazine, specifically their January 1943 edition. It's older than I am. That's 82 years ago, folks. Before the end of World War II, before television, and long before horror had figured out what it wasn't supposed to say out loud.
These stories are windows into another world, sometimes imaginative, sometimes nightmarish, and sometimes insensitive. As such, we want to offer trigger warnings throughout tonight's show. Many of the authors in that era wrote from within the cultural limitations of their time, and it shows in ways that are worth exploring, but also worth approaching critically.
We'll be calling that out before each story, so you can make informed decisions about what to listen to. Some stories feature racist or misogynistic language and tropes common in pulp fiction of the early 20th century. Consider this a content notice for the full episode.
And if you end up loving tonight's eerie excavation, be sure to check out our July 8th, 2020 episode. That's Season 6, Episode 16, titled Unnatural Narratives. That one featured 5 other tales from this very same issue of Weird Tales, dusted off and resurrected just for your listening pleasure.
We've got 5 stories tonight, from strange sisters to sinister collections, from mystical beasts to tomb moons rising over a place that shouldn't exist. So sit back, dim the lights, and remember, these tales weren't written for our world, but here they are all the same. Before we dive into the darkness, here's a little something to help support what we do. No dark rituals required.
For just $7.99 a month, or less with a yearly plan, you can access our patrons area, unlocking early, ad-free versions of every episode, plus exclusive stories and extended editions.
Visit simplyscarypodcast.com and click Patrons, or go to chillingtalesfordarknights.com to learn more. It's how you keep our stories alive and how we keep bringing you new ones. Our first tale tonight concerns a girl born under a sign no one wanted. and a town where superstition might just outlive compassion.
Originally published in 1943 in Weird Tales, this story contains racial tropes and stereotypes reflective of the era. It should be heard critically as a product of its time.
From Mary Elizabeth Counselman, this is Seventh Sister, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. The night Seven Sisters was born, a squinched owl hollered outside the cabin from sundown until the moment of her birth. Then it stopped its quavering cry. Everything stopped. The whippoorwills and the loblollies, the katydids in the fig tree beside the well, even the tree frogs, burring their promise of rain, as sheet lightning flickered across the black sky. The row of slave cabins behind the old place looked ramshackled and deserted. It had been deserted for a fact ever since Grant took Richmond. Daylight or a moon would have shown their shingle roofs fallen in and their sagging porches overgrown with jimson weed and honeysuckle. Only one cabin was livable now and inhabited. Doty, grandson of a Saunders slave, had wandered back to the old place with a wife and a flock of emaciated children. They had not thrived on odd-job fare in the city, so Doty had come home, the first year of the Depression, serenely certain of his welcome. He knew Captain Jim and Miss Addie would give them a cabin with a truck garden in return for whatever sporadic labor was needed on the old rundown plantation, smack on the Alabama-Georgia line. That was in 29, 6 years ago. Miss Addie was dead now and buried in the family cemetery on the South Hill. Most of the land had been sold to meet taxes. Miss Addie's grandson, Captain Jim, alone was left. Captain Jim was a baby doctor in Chattanooga. He kept the old place closed up, except for weekend trips down with his wife and 2 young sons. The red clay fields lay fallow and uncultivated. The rail fences had fallen, and even the white-columned place itself was leaky and in need of paint. Whenever Doty or Maddie Sue thought of it, they had one of the young'uns sweep the leaves and chicken sign from the bare sanded clay of the front yard. But aside from that weekly chore, they had the deserted plantation all to themselves and lived accordingly. The children grew fat and sassy on yams and chitterlings. Doty drank more home brew and slept all day in the barrel-slat hammock. And Maddie Sue cooked, quarreled, and bore another child every year. That is, until Seven Sisters was born. That night, a squinch owl hollered, and somewhere beyond the state highway, a dog howled 3 times. More than that, one of the martins, nesting in the gourd pole in front of the cabin, got into the house and beat its brains out against the wall before anyone could set it free. 3 signs. Small wonder that at sundown, Maddie Sue was writhing in agony of premature childbirth. Not even the 2 greased axes, which Ressie and Clarabelle, her oldest unmarried daughters, aged 15 and 17, had placed under her bed to cut the pain, did any good. "Oh, Lossie, Mommy done took bad," Ressie whimpered. She hovered over the fat, groaning black woman on the bed, eyes wide and frightened in her pretty face. Ressie had seen many of her brothers and sisters come into the world, but always before Maddie Sue had borne as easily and naturally as a cat. "Do, my savior," Clarabelle whispered. "We gotta get somebody to midwife her. Aunt Fan, go along and fetch her, quick. Oh, Lossie," she wailed, holding high the kerosene lamp and peering down at the woman in pain. I's sure scared. What you waiting on, fool? Run! Oh, Lossie, Mammy! Mammy!" Ressie plunged out into the night. The slap of her bare feet trailed into silence. The cabin's front room was very still, save for the regular moaning of Doty's wife and an occasional snore from Doty himself. Drunk and asleep on the kitchen floor, there was no sound within. The other children were clustered in one corner, silent as young foxes. Only the whites of their eyes were visible against the dark. Clarabelle tiptoed about in her mail-order print dress, her chemically straightened hair rolled up on curlers for the church social tomorrow. Light from the sooty lamp threw stunned shadows. The reek of kerosene and the smell of bodies blended with the pungent odor of peaches hung to dry in a string beside the window. Hot summer scents drifted in, sun-baked earth, guano from the garden, the cloying perfume of a clematis vine running along the porch rafters. It was all so familiar, the smells, the night sounds, the broken and mended furniture discarded by 4 generations of Saunderses, the pictures tacked on the plank walls of a snow scene, of a Spanish dancer, the president, torn from old magazines Captain Jim and Miss Ruth had cast aside. The last year's feed-sore calendar, dated January 1934. The gilded, rain-marred wreath saved from Miss Addie's funeral, now decorating the mantel with its purple and gilt ribbon, read, Abid, YHMF. Even the childbirth scene was familiar to all of Maddie's children except the youngest. And yet, there was an eerie quality about the night throwing the familiar out of focus. The young'uns felt it, huddled, supperless, and in the corner, while Clarabelle fluttered ineffectually about the bed and its burden. It was so hot and oppressive, with a curious air of waiting. Even a rumble of thunder along the horizon sounded hushed and furtive, and the screech owl's cry drifted nearer. The woman on the bed writhed and moaned again. Clarabelle twisted her black hands together, bright with pink nail polish, a relic of the winters spent in Chattanooga as a nurse for Captain Jim's youngest. She went to the open door for a 4th time, listening for the sound of approaching footsteps. Aunt Fam had a cabin down the road about a half mile and had washed for the Andrews as far back as anyone remembered. She was a churchwoman. In fact, one of her 3 husbands had been a preacher before he knifed a man and got sent away to prison. If anyone could help Maddie Sue in her extremity, it would be Aunt Fan. The squinch owl wailed again. Clarabelle drew a quick circle on the cabin floor and spat in it. But the moaning of her mother went on, incoherent, rising and falling as though in imitation of the owl's ill-omened call. Clarabelle stiffened, listening. The hurried crunch of shod feet came to her ears at last. With a gasp of relief, she ran out to meet the pair, Ressie returning, and a tiny, weazened old woman with a wen in the center of her forehead, jutting out like a blunt horn. "Aunt Fan, what'd I tell you? Listen yonder," Ressie whimpered. "That old squinch owl been hollerin' fit to be tied ever since sundown." The old midwife poised on the porch step, head cocked. She grunted and, with a slow, precise gesture, took off her apron to don it again, wrong side out. That ought to fix him. Why, what, Maddie Sue? Maddie Sue? My land of Goshen, that young'un don't belong to get born for 2 months yet. She been working on the garden? Well, Clarabelle started to lie, then nodded, contrite. Seemed like she did do a little weeding yesterday. Uh-huh. So that's it? I done told her? That low-down, trifling doty. Aunt Fan, with a snort that included all men, switched into the cabin. Outside, the screech owl chuckled mockingly, as though it possessed a deeper knowledge of the mystery of birth and death. Ressie and Clarabelle hunched together on the front stoop. Through the door, they could hear Aunt Fan's sharp voice ordering the children out of her way into the kitchen. Maddie Sue's regular moaning had risen in timbre to a shrill cry. Clarabelle, squatting on the log step of the porch, whispered under her breath. "Huh?" Ressie muttered. "Ain't no use praying with that old squinch owl howling in his full head off. Oh, lossy Clary, you reckon Aunt Fan can—" The old girl shivered but did not reply. Her eyes, wide and shining from the widow's glow, swept across the flat terrain. Fireflies twinkled in the scrub pines beyond the cornfield. A muffled roar from above caught her ear once. She raised her head. Wing lights on a transport plane, racing the storm from Birmingham to Atlanta, winked down at her, then vanished in the clouds. 11:30, she murmured. It's late tonight. Daggone. If that old fool don't shut up his screeching. She tucked herself, sheepishly fearful of her own blasphemy. Of course, there was nothing at all that stuff her mammy and Aunt Tham had passed down to them, huddling before the fire on rainy nights. Signs, omens, juju. Cap and Jim had laughed and told them, often enough, that the girl started violently. From the cabin, a scream shattered the night, high-pitched, final. Then everything was still. The tree frogs, the quarreling katydids, the whippoorwills, the muttering thunder. The trick of the wind even carried away the sound of the transport plane. And the screech owl stopped hollering, like an evil spirit swallowed up by the darkness. A few minutes later, Aunt Fan came to the door, a tiny bundle in her arms, swaddled in an old dress of Maddie's. The girls leapt to their feet, wordless, eager. But the old woman in the doorway did not speak. She was murmuring something under her breath that sounded like a prayer or an incantation. There was a sinister poise to her tiny form, framed in the lighted doorway, silent, staring out into the night. Suddenly she spoke. "Clary, honey. Ressie. Your mammy done dead. Well, nothing I could do, but my soul to glory, it's something funny about this gal baby. She white as cotton. I reckon your mammy must have had a sin on she soul. How come the Lord taking her?" Clarabelle gasped a warning. A broad hulk had blotted out the lamplight behind Aunt Fan. Dodie, awake, still drunk and mean, a tall sepia man wearing only his overalls, he swayed against the door for support, glowering down at the bundle in Aunt Fan's arms. "Woods colt," Dodie growled. "I ain't going to feed no woods colt. Get hit on out of my cabin. I got 8 young'uns of my own to feed, working myself down to a frazzle. Get hit on out, I done told you," he snarled, aiming a sideswipe at Aunt Fam that would have knocked her sprawling if it had landed. But the old woman ducked nimbly, hopped out onto the porch, and glared back at Dodie. Her tiny black eyes glittered with anger and outrage, more for herself than for the squirming handful of life in her embrace. "You, Dodie Saunders," Aunt Fam shrilled. "You big, low-down, trifling piece of trash. I gwine tell Cap'n Jim on you. Just wait and see, don't I tell him. Throwing Maddie's own baby out of the house like she want nothing but a mess of old corn chucks. Maddie laying dead in yonder." Dodie swayed, leery-eyed, trying to separate the speaker from her alcoholic image. "Dead? Maddie, Sue. My Maddie Sue done dead? Oh, Losey, why didn't you tell me?" His blunt, brutal features crumpled all at once, childlike in grief. He swirled back into the cabin toward the quilt-covered bed. "Maddie!" The 3 in the porch heard his voice. "Maddie, honey, hit your Dodie. Say something, honey. Don't sull up like that and be mad at Dodie. What I done now? Maddie!" Clarabelle and Ressie clung together, weeping. Only Aunt Fan was dry-eyed and practical. In the dark, she looked down at the mewling newborn baby, and slowly her eyes widened. With a gesture almost of repugnance, the old woman held the infant at arm's length, peering at it in the pale glow from the open cabin door. "My Lord of mercy," she whispered. "No wonder Maddie Sue died of birthing in this here one. Makes no difference if it's a wood colt or not. This here child." She stopped, staring now at Clarabelle and Ressie. They paused in their grieving, caught on by Auntie Fan's queer tone. The old woman was mumbling under her breath, counting on her black fingers, nodding. "That old screech owl," Ressie sobbed. "I knowed it. If it had hadn't a hollered, Mammy wouldn't..." Screenchild don't mean nothing tonight. Aunt Fan cut in with an odd intensity. Ayla, it just stomping down natural that a screenchild come around a holler at this here birthing. No, neither hit wouldn't do no good to put no axes under Maddie's bed, nor do no praying. You know why? This here young'un got 6 sisters, ain't she? That makes she a 7th sister. She gonna have the power. Like a solemn period to her words, a clap of thunder boomed in the west, scattering 10-pin echoes all over the sky. Yes, sirree, a 7th sister, Aunt Fan repeated, rubbing the wind on her wrinkled forehead for good luck. I'm gonna have trouble with this child. It's a pure pity she didn't die alongside Shmammy. Ressie and Clarabelle, saucer-eyed, peered at their motherless newborn sister, at her tiny puckered face that resembled nothing so much as a small monkey. But she was white, abnormally white, paler than any light-skinned child they'd ever seen, paler even than a white baby. Her little eyes were a translucent, watery pink. Her faint fuzz of hair was like cotton. The Lord help us to get right, Clarabelle whispered in awe. What us gonna do with her? Pappy won't leave her stay here. Not no woods cold, and sure not no 7th sister. Will you keep care of her, Aunt Fan? Anyways, till after the funeral. The old woman shook her head. With flat emphasis, she thrust the wailing bundle into Ressie's arms and stopped down the porch step. Nah, sir, honey, not me. It say in the good book not to have no truck with no conjure woman. And that little 7th sister of yourn, Quinn, a plain out, hard down conjure woman, sure as you're born. Just keep her out in the corn crib. Dodie won't take no notice of her. Feed her on goat's milk, Aunt Fam shook her head in wonder. She sure is funny color. It was a month after Maddie's funeral before Cap'n Jim came down to the old place again with the boys and Miss Ruth. When he heard by neighborhood grapevine that Dodie's new baby was being hidden out in the corn crib like an infant Moses, he stormed down to the cabin with proper indignation. Took one startled look at the baby, white as a slug that has spent its life in darkness under a rock. Pink eyes blinked up at him painfully. The little thing seemed to be thriving very well on goat's milk, but the corn crib was draughty and full of rats. Cap'n Jim attacked Dodie with the good-natured tyranny of all deep Southerners toward the workers who trust and depend upon him. I'm ashamed of you, boy. Dodie was over 10 years older than Dr. Saunders. Making your own baby sleep out in the corn crib, just for some damn fool notion that she's a hoodoo. And of course, she is her own baby. She's just an albino. That's why she's so white. Dodie bobbed and scratched his woolly head. Yes, sir, Cap'n. Sure enough? Yes, it's a lack of pigment in the skin. Dr. Saunders floundered, faced by the childlike bewilderment in the man's face. I mean, she's black, but her skin is white. Oh, the devil. You take that child into your cabin and treat her right, or I'll turn you out so quick it'll make your head spin. Pass her. Dodie grinned and bobbed again, turning his frayed straw hat around and around by the brim. Yes, sir, Cap'n. You ain't got a quarter you don't need, is you? Seem like we's plumb out of salt and stuff. Ain't got no nails neither to mend the chicken house. Dr. Saunders grunted and handed him 50 cents. Here, but if you spend it on bay rum and get drunk this weekend, I'll tan your hide. No, sir. Dodie beamed and guffawed his admiration of the boss man's unerring shot. I ain't going to do that, Cap'n. If you want me for anything else, just ring the bell. I'll send Clarabelle on up to look after the boys. Dodie shambled off, grinning. Cap'n Jim let out a baffled sigh. He strode back toward the place, well aware that Dodie would be drunk on dime store bay rum by nightfall, and that The big, rusty plantation bell in the yard would clang in vain if he wanted any chores performed. But he had laid the law down about the new baby, and that order at least would be obeyed. A pure albino, he told his wife later at supper. Poor little mite. It's amazing how healthy she is on that treatment. They won't even give her a name. They just call her Seven Sisters and cross their fool fingers every time she looks at them. I have to say myself, she is weird looking with that paper white hair and skin. Oh well, they'll get used to her. Captain Jim laughed, shrugged, and helped himself to some more watermelon pickle. Dodie, with his 50 cents, rode muleback to the nearest town 5 miles away. In a fatherly moment, while buying his bay rum at the 5 and 10, he bought a nickel's worth of peppermints for the young'uns. He bought salt, soda, and some nails. Plodding back home up the highway, he passed Aunt Fan's cabin and hailed her with due solemnity. I sure got a seven-sister, all right, he called over the sagging wire gate after a moment of chit-chat. Captain Jim say she ain't no woods cold. He say she black, but she got pygmies in the skin, what make her look so bright-colored. Do my savior, I bet she got them glue gum. I sure ain't going to let my chaw on my finger like dem other young'uns when she teasing. I ain't fixin' to get pizened. Praise the Lord, Aunt Fan answered noncommittally, rocking and fanning herself on the front stoop. Reckon all she got gwind up to be when she old enough to be noticed? Ooh-wee! Make my blood run cold to study about it. Dodie shivered, clutching his store purchases as though their prosaic touch could protect him from his own thoughts. If there was any way to get rid of the baby without violence, but Captain Jim had said his say, and there was nothing for him to do but raise her along with the others. It was a fearful cross to bear, for Seven Sisters began to show signs of the power at an early age. She could touch warts and they'd disappear, if not at once, at least within a few weeks. She would cry, and almost every time a bull bat would fly out of the dusk to go circling and screeching around the cabin's fieldstone chimney. Then there was the time when she was 3, playing quietly in the cabin shade, her dead white skin and hair in freakish contrast to those of her black sisters and brothers. The other children were nearby, but not too near, keeping the eye on her demanded by Clarabelle without actually playing with her. Willie T., 5, was playing train with a row of bricks tied on a string. Booger and Gaynell, twins of 8, were fishing for jackworms, poking a blade of grass down each hole and jerking up the tiny dragon-like insects. Lula and Willeen and Buzz, aged 12, 9, and 13, were engaged in a game of squat tag under the fig trees. They were not paying much attention to their queer-colored younger sister, though from time to time she glanced at them wistfully. Willie T. was the one who happened to look up and see the bird clumsily winging along overhead in the clear June sky. He pointed, not greatly interested. Look at that old shy poke. Snatching up a stick, he aimed it at the flapping target, closed one eye, and shouted, "Bang! Bang! Balloom!" an imitation of Captain Jim's rifle. The bird flew on. The other children glanced up idly. Only the little albino, lonesome and longing for attention, feigned interest in this byplay. Squinting eagerly up at the distant bird, she pointed the old chicken foot with which she was playing and trebled in mimicry of her brother. Bang! Bang! Boom! And a weird, incredible thing happened. The shy poke, flapping along, wavered suddenly, one wing drooping. With a lurching, fluttering motion, it veered and fell like a plummet, striking the ground not 3 yards from where the girl sat. Willie T. stared. The bird was dead. There was blood on its feathers. In a stunned, silent, wide-eyed group, Maddie's other children backed away from their ghostly sister. She blinked at them, her pinkish eyes squinting playfully in the sunlight. Bang! Bang! Seven Sisters repeated in a hopeful undertone. There was a shuffle of running feet. Her lower lip quivered when she saw that she had been left alone. She was always alone after that, partly because the other children shunned her, and partly because she could not see well enough to run after them. She had developed a particular squint, holding her towhead to one side, slit-eyed, upper lip drawn back to show her oddly pointed little teeth. For a seventh sister, she tripped over things and hurt herself twice as often as her brothers and sisters, who were not gifted with supernatural powers. Captain Jim, on a flying visit to the plantation one Sunday, had noticed the way the child always kept to the shadowy places. "Weak eyes," he pronounced. "Typical of albinos. Have to get her some special glasses." He sighed, mentally adding up the vanishing bank account. Well, time enough when she starts school, though Lord help the little thing at recess. That preference for shadow was given another connotation by dark-skinned observers. "Da! Ain't I done told you?" Aunt Fan was triumphant. "See just like a cat in the dark, but can't hardly see nothing in the daytime. Yes, sirree. She a plain-out, hard-down conjure woman, and I know it the first time I sot eyes on her." By this time, the lone screech owl that had attracted Seven Sisters' birth had become 7 screech owls, hovering in a ring around the cabin to demand Maddie's soul in return for the new baby's powder. This power mystified Seven Sisters, though she did not doubt that she had it. Clarabelle and Dodie had told her so ever since she could understand words. Now, a thin, too quiet child of 6, she accepted the fact as simply and sadly as one might accept having been born with an interesting club foot. But because it was the only way in which she could attract attention, half fear, half respect, the little albino drew on her imagination, and she did not know herself where fact ended and fancy began. The other children jeered at her, but were frankly envious. The elders laughed and remarked that nobody but ignorant country folk believed in conjures anymore. Secretly, they came to her by night and hissed at her window and proffered silver in return for her magic. Seven Sisters never saw any of the money, however, as the business was always transacted through Clarabelle or Dodie. Some of the things they wanted were incomprehensible to her at first. Mojos, tiny bags of cloth that might contain anything at all, plus the one thing only she possessed, the power. In Atlanta, in Birmingham and Memphis, especially in Harlem, a good one might sell for as much as $10. These, according to whatever words the conjurer mumbled over them, were able to perform all sorts of miracles for the wearer, from restoring the affection of a bored mate to ensuring luck in the numbers game. Seven Sisters, with the precocity of all outcasts, caught the idea early. Like the little girls who started the witch scare in Salem, she felt pains and saw apparitions for the bug-eyed approval of kin and neighbors. She made up words and mumbled them on every occasion, squinting weirdly and impressively. She hummed tuneless little chants in an eerie rhythm. She memorized the better-known household conjures, such as burying 3 hairs from the end of a hound's tail under the front steps to keep them from straying. With ready wit, she invented new ones, then forgot them, and supplied others on call. True, most of these tricks had, at one time or another, been subtly suggested by Aunt Fan or Clarabelle as the proper procedure for a Seven Sister. But the little albino, pleased and excited by the substitute for affection, threw herself into the part, a pale, wistful Shirley Temple in the role of Cybele. She wanted to be admired, however. She did not want to be feared. But even Clarabelle, who loved her in a skittish way one might grow to love a pet snake, gave her a wide berth after the incident of the stomachache. It happened one sultry August day when Dodie came stumbling into the cabin, drunker than usual and in a nasty mood. "What that low-down trifling Seven Sister?" he bellowed. "Where's she at? I couldn't wear her to hide off in her back. Taking that 4-bit piece from old man Wilson for a hunting mojo. Hiding it from her poor old pappy would feed her. Where's she at? Young'un, you come out from under that table. I sees you." The other children, gnawing pork chop bones beside the fireplace, thanks to the sale of a health mojo purported to contain the infallible John the Conqueror root, stirred uneasily. In this mood, Doty was apt to throw things at anyone within range. But it appeared that Seven Sisters, quaking under the table, was the main object of his wrath tonight. "Come on out, you hear me?" Doty snarled, grabbing up a stick of lightwood from the hearth and advancing toward the culprit. "That went whoop you good, stealing my forbid." "I done lost it, Pappy." Seven Sisters' childish treble was drowned out by his bellow of rage. "Don't whoop me. I draped it in the field. I couldn't see where I draped it. I'll go get it." "Now you's lying to me," Doty roared, waving his club. "Come on out. I'll learn you." The other children, fascinated, stopped gnawing their chop bones for an instant to watch, their greasy black faces gleaming in the firelight. Doty jerked the table aside. Seven Sisters cringed. Then, "Don't you hit me with no stick," the frightened child shrilled. "I'll put a hoodoo on you. Doty lunged and fell over the table. His stick whistled dangerously close to the child's towhead. The next morning, Doty was groaning with pain, doubled over, hugging his stomach. Sweat stood out on his black face. He stared at this weirdly white daughter, backed away, thick lips trembling. Seven Sisters made a dive through the open door and out into the friendly night. Captain Jim happened to be at the place that day. It was a Sunday. He rushed Doty to the nearest city in his car. "Appendicitis," Captain Jim called it, to the man at the hospital. He and Miss Ruth had a good laugh over Doty's version of the attack. But after that, Clarabelle stopped giving her little albino sister a playful spank when she was naughty. No one would touch her, even in fun. "I done told you," Aunt Fan intoned. "Do Moses, putting a hoodoo on her own pappy. That old Seven Sister, she just born to trouble, she bad." For more than a week afterward, Seven Sisters hid in the woods, creeping out only to sneak food from the kitchen. She was deeply frightened, so frightened that when Captain Jim came back to bring Doty from the hospital, she ran from him like a wild creature. If she had not tripped over a log and knocked the breath out of her slight body, he would never have caught her. Dr. Saunders helped her up and held her gently by the shoulders, marveling anew at her features and cotton-white hair and skin. Her single garment, a faded dress which had not been changed for 8 days, hung half off of one shoulder, torn and filthy. She was trembling all over, squinting up at him, with white-lashed pinkish eyes dilated by terror. Now, child," the tall boss man was saying, in a tone as gentle as the grip of his hands. "What have those fools been telling you? That it's your fault about Doty's appendix? Well, heaven help us." He threw back his head, laughing, but stopped when he saw how it frightened his small captive. "Why, don't be scared. Captain Jim won't hurt you. Look here, I got a present for you. Don't let the other young'uns get a hold of it, you hear? Just hide it and play with it all by yourself because it's yours." The little albino stopped trembling. Gingerly, she took the proffered box and gaped at the treasure inside. A doll baby 1 foot high, with real hair, red hair, and eyes that opened and shut. When she turned it over, it gave a thin cry. "Mama!" Seven Sisters giggled. The Cap chuckled. "Oh, I don't reckon you want this old baby doll." He made a pretense of taking it back, eyes twinkling. The child clutched at it. "You do? Well then, what do you say?" Seven Sisters ducked her head shyly. "I don't care," she whispered. Polite rural South for "thank you." Dr. Saunders chuckled again. "That's a good girl." He stood up, gave her a careless pat, then he strode off toward the place, frowning over his own problems, not the least of which was mother-in-law trouble. He and Ruth, along with their 2 boys, had been so happy in their touch-and-go way. Then his wife's mother, a forthright lady from Oklahoma, had descended upon them and decided to run their lives with a new efficiency. With her customary dispatch, She had found a buyer for the old Saunders plantation and was now raging at her slipshod son-in-law's reluctance to sell. Even Captain Jim had to admit that the price was half again as much as the property was worth. Besides, his practice in Chattanooga had been dwindling of late. A mother-in-law could point out such matters so vividly. Seven Sisters blinked after he retreated. Keeping to the shade of the pine coppice, she followed the tall white man a little way, the doll squeezed tightly against her soiled blue gingham dress. Captain Jim waved at someone who met him on the orchard. A pretty red-headed woman. They went on to the house together, arms about each other's waists. Seven Sisters watched them until they were out of sight. Thereafter, she listened attentively whenever Dodie or Clary spoke of Captain Jim. She grew to love anyone that he loved, and to hate anyone that he hated, with a dog-like loyalty. In her child's mind, good became personified as Dr. Sanders, and evil as either the sheriff or old Miss Beecher. It was common knowledge about the mother-in-law trouble. Clarabelle, who cooked all year round for the Saunderses now, had passed along every word of the quarrel. "Us'll get turned out like white trash if into camp and sell the place," Dodie mourned. "That old Miss Beecher. Do la. That old woman mean as a cottonmouth. She don't care what happened to us folks, nor anybody. Miss Ruth sure don't take after her none. I wish she'd fall down the steps and bust her brains out so she wouldn't plague the captain no more. If he don't sell come Thursday, Thanksgiving, she gonna just make his life miserable." Seven Sisters listened, huddled apart from her black kin in a shadowy corner of the cabin. Her little heart began to beat rapidly as a mad idea crept into her head. Without a sound, she slipped out into the frosty night of mid-November. There was a thing Aunt Fan had hinted to her one day, or rather, to Clarabelle within her hearing, since no one ever spoke directly to a Seven Sister in idle conversation. Something about a graven image. There was even, Aunt Fan said, a passage about it in the good book, warning all Christians to steer clear of the matter. But Seven Sisters was not a Christian. She had never been baptized in the creek like the rest of Dodie's brood. Nothing hindered the plan, and it sounded remarkably simple. Whatever she does to the image, you does to the one who names it. Aunt Fam's solemn words came back to her clearly. Just rope something around it, what they wears next to the skin. Don't make no never mind what it is, and that's the conjure. Hello. I see a conjure man do that when I was married up with my first husband. And a woman who conjure dropped dead as a doornail that same winter. And they do say as hit owl where a big black cat got in the room where they was setting up with the corp. It jumped him up on the bed and go to yowling like old Satan himself. Yes, sirree. That's the Lord's truth, like I'm telling it. Seven Sisters, picking her way easily through the dark, slipped into the pine coppice. After a moment, heart pounding, she dug up something from under a pile of leaves. A faint sound issued from it, causing her to start violently. "Mama!" Like a small white ghost, the child then ran through the peach orchard. The place, dark now since Captain Jim had gone back to Chattanooga, loomed just ahead. Seven Sisters found what she was looking for under the steps of the isolated kitchen, an old piece of silk nightgown that she had seen Miss Ruth's mother herself give Clarabelle as a polishing rag for the flat sober. The older girl had used it and flung it under the kitchen steps. Seven Sisters retrieved it now furtively, padded swiftly back through the orchard. Deep in the pine coppice, lighted only by the filtered light of a quarter moon, she sat down cross-legged. For a long time she stared at the lovely thing Captain Jim had given her, the only thing that had ever been truly her own. Her hair was so soft, the glass eyes so friendly, but now the doll had taken on a new personality, a hated one, Seven Sisters glared at it, shivering a little. Then, deftly, she tied the silk rag around its china neck and stood up. "Oh, Miss Beezer, you's old Miss Beezer," she hissed it, with a careful emphasis, then clarified against all mistake to whatever dark pointed ears might be listening. "Miss Ruth's mama, Cap'n Jim's wife's mama. That's who you is, doll. You hear me? Old Miss Beecher." With a fierce motion, she banged the puppet hard against the tree trunk. The china head broke off and rolled at her bare feet. "Mama!" wailed the headless body accusingly. Seven Sisters dropped it as though it were red hot. She backed away, rubbing her hands on her dress like an infant Lady Macbeth and shuddering in the Indian summer chill. Panting, shaken, she turned and ran back to the cabin. But she paused in the half-open door. Excited activity was going on inside. Aunt Fan was there, puffing with importance and fumbling for her box of snuff. Dodie was shouting questions, wringing his big hands. Clarabelle, Ressie, and the others were milling about like a flock of chickens, clucking and squawking in chorus. "And the foam call say for you to clean up the family lot on the South Hill," Aunt Fam made herself heard shrilly. "She gonna be buried from the place like Miss Hattie." "Oh, Lussies, ain't it awful?" This from Ressie. "Sure is, honey," Aunt Fam agreed complacently. "I don't reckon the captain'll ever be the same. He was so awful. I don't reckon he care what become of the place, or nothing. He's so cut up about it." "Lord help us," Dodie shouted for a fifth time. "When it happened? How come?" "I done told you," Aunt Fam repeated, relishing the drama of her words. "Truck run slap into them. She was plumb flying out of the car. Cap'n won't even scratch up, but it broke her poor neck." The child in the doorway caught her breath sharply. The conjure had worked? So soon? A little knot of nausea gathered in her stomach in memory of the china head rolling against her bare foot. Then an angry thought came. "Aunt Fam, Cap'n ain't going to bury that old woman in that family lot, is she?" Seven Sisters piped above the chatter. "Not that old Miss Beecher." The excited group barely glanced at her, impatient for the interruption. "Miss Beecher?" Aunt Fam grunted. "Law, child, it ain't old Beecher that got killed. It was Miss Ruth." The elderly woman continued with her narrative, dwelling on the details with relish. "And the man told Marse Joe Adams over the phone. Hey, law, he say the captain just sat there by she bed and hold her hand. Don't cry nor nothing. Just sat there and stare, like he dead too." Seven Sisters heard no more. A faint sound like falling timber rolled in her ears. Through it, dimly, she thought she heard a screech owl's quavering cry. Eerie, mocking, malicious. She turned and ran blindly, sobbing. Cap'n Jim's Miss Ruth. She had forgotten Miss Ruth's hair was red, exactly like the doll's, and that soiled bit of nightgown might not have been old Miss Beecher's at all, but Miss Ruth's, Captain Jim's Miss Ruth. Beyond the cornfield, the Blackwoods opened up to receive the small ghostly figure, running like an animal in pain, running nowhere, anywhere, into the chill autumn night. Sawbriars tore dark patches in her dead-white skin, but Seven Sisters didn't feel them. She ran, careening into tree trunks and fighting through scuppernong vines until the salt taste of blood came into her mouth. Twice she fell and lay into the damp leaves for a long time, her thin shoulders racked with sobs. "Oh, Cap'n Jim, I didn't go to do it," she whimpered aloud once. "I didn't mean to. I didn't. Honest, I didn't." At that moment, she heard the dogs baying. Tense as a fox, she sat up and listened. Was it old man Wilson, hunting with his pack along the North Ridge? Or was it the law? A posse with guns following the deputy sheriff and his 2 floppy-haired bloodhounds through the canebrake, following a trail of small bare feet. Little albino sprang up, her flat features contorted with panic. Harrowing yarns crowded into her memory of the time Aunt Fan's preacher husband had hid in the canebrake for 8 days, with the dogs baying closer and closer, and Aunt Fan's husband had only cut a man with his razor, while she... Just then she heard the screech owl right over her head. Seven Sisters was running again, goaded now by the spurs of terror, but now the very woods seemed hostile. Gnarled branches snatched at her cottony hair and tore a jagged flap in her gingham dress. Old spiderwebs clung to her face. The dog sounded nearer. Once more she tripped and fell, panting, but sprang up again with a scream as something slithered out from beneath her arm. The screech owl tittered again from somewhere above her. It seemed to be trailing the ghostly little fugitive, so white against the ground. Seven Sisters ran on blindly, staggering with exhaustion. Once she cried out in her terror, oddly the very name of the one she was running from. Cap'n Jim. All of a sudden, the ground dropped from her beneath her feet. She pitched forward and felt herself falling into space. Dark, icy water rushed up out of nowhere to meet and engulf her. Mist rose from the cornfield in front of Doty's cabin. Dry leaves rattled. The gourds on the marten pole swung in the wind. Somewhere a screech owl quavered again, far away, in the direction of the creek, whose muddy waters had washed away the sins of many. That was Seventh Sister by Mary Elizabeth Counselman, and she may have been born under a cursed moon, but her shadow stretched far beyond it.
If you ever find yourself in a backwoods town where everyone avoids your house, maybe it's not you they're afraid of. Maybe it's what they did to you.
Our next story features a rare bookseller with a unique taste in bindings, and a passion for preservation that goes a bit too far. As a warning, this tale contains language and attitudes reflected of the misogyny common in pulp fiction of the 1940s. Listener discretion is advised.
From David H. Keller, this is Bindings Deluxe, performed by yours truly, Malcolm Blackwood. I don't like women. I feel the same way, was my reply. Now, when it comes to men or books, why, that is something different. We were in the Turkish bath and just beginning the sweat. Only the two of us in the room, on steamer chairs, with the temperature at 170, but feeling more like 200. The other man had evidently been in for some time before I entered, for his appearance indicated that he was beginning to suffer. At least he had surely reached the point of irritation. I thought this cutaneous irritability might be the reason for his outburst against the fair sex. At least there was no other obvious reason. To make his antipathy toward women in general all the stronger, he repeated the idea with variations. I just don't like them. They do things differently. They think differently. I can't even say that I believe they think. Perhaps they just react to their emotions. Why, I have seen women calmly do things that a man wouldn't think of. Fond of books? He asked, abruptly changing the subject. You bet, I replied enthusiastically. Ought to be. I collect and bind them as an avocation. I make some money by binding and spend it collecting. Make a specialty of early Pennsylvania imprints. I have some really nice books, he sighed as he said it. A few of them are distinctly rare. Odd. I'm a binder myself. Must get out of here now. I can stand just so much, and then the heat worries me. He walked out, a rather portly middle-aged man. 10 minutes later, I followed him. An hour later, I caught up with him in the sunlit patio. He was exposing his back to the lamps. I looked at that back. sat down quietly on the cot next to his, continuing to look incredulous. At last I was satisfied that what I saw on his skin was indeed real and not an illusion. Then I made myself comfortable on my cot and began to ponder this thing. I had never seen anything like it, not once. In all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of men I had examined in the army, had I ever seen a back approaching the like of that one. Of course, it was something that could not be discussed. Certainly nothing one man could ask about directly. But if he offered to talk of it freely, of his own accord, it would certainly be interesting. After the alcohol rub, I invited him to have a snack or refreshment. Wrapped in sheets, we became better acquainted over a Swiss sandwich and a cup of coffee. We found that, being bookbinders, we had much in common. He was an older man than I by perhaps 20 years, and when I told him that I had bound an erotica in the skin of a diamondback rattler for a customer, he acknowledged it to be both a new and unique idea. And rather appropriate, he added, because it would not have been erotica without having a woman in it for villain. And if a woman is not a rattlesnake, I'd have you tell me just what she is. I agreed with him. At least I let him think I did. His almost violent dislike of women intrigued me, and I wanted his explanation of why he felt as he did. But more than that, I wanted the story I was sure was connected to his back. So I sat there, expounding broadly on all the strange behavior of women which I had observed in my medical practice, called them traitors, cited history to prove them scheming, devious, and cruel. All the while I was talking thus, I was glad I was in the bathhouse instead of my own home, where my wife might hear me. Of course, she would have known I was just egging him on, but she never did like it if I gave my opinion of her sisters. It all ended with his inviting me to visit him the next time I was in Boston. The address he gave was in the Back Bay section. I told him I expected to visit his city soon, and he replied that the sooner the better, pleased he would be, and added with a sly wink, "Do you suppose you could bring some rattlesnake skins?" 3 weeks later, I sat in his library. It was an aristocrat's room done in natural burled walnut panels between wide and well-filled glass-enclosed bookcases, which were built into the wall. The ceiling was of the same wood, carved in squares and supported by rough-hewn beams. 2 large windows looked out across Boylston Street to the beautiful public gardens, which were colorful with fall foliage. At one end of the room was a great fireplace of redstone granite, flanked on either side by deep, restful, leather-upholstered chairs. Before this fireplace was a table set for supper. "I thought you might enjoy a quiet evening here," my host remarked. "Besides, Ling, my Chinese boy, is a fine cook. I like the Chinese for many reasons, but chief of all possible reasons is the fact that they, as a nation, as well as individuals, despise women." The supper served by the quiet Chinese boy was excellent indeed, the wine of exquisite bouquet and the tobacco smooth and mild. By the time supper was over, we were rather mellow and confidential. I ventured to recall his great obsession by remarking, quite casually, "Neither do I like women." "Are you married?" he asked. "Yes," I admitted, with a wry twist to my lips to prevent the smile I could hardly resist. "Too bad. You ought to really know about them. They certainly outdo themselves to make a fool of a man. I was in love once. Just once, though. But the woman nearly killed me. After that lesson, no more women." He was becoming vocally reminiscent. "Is your wife sadistic? Has she ever tried to kill you?" "Not yet. Of course, she has told me several times what she thinks of me and men in general, but one can never be too sure of the female of the species, you know." "Better be careful. She may poison you someday," he warned. "Gracious, I hope not." "So do I. But be on your guard. I'm naturally suspicious of all these she-devils. And that's why I'm alive today. And the other poor trusting fellows dead. Some of them died? Yes, 25 of them. Some of them my best friends. Of course, there were a few I was not acquainted with really well, but all were nice boys. Was it during the war? Spies? I queried. I wanted to get him started on that story of his back, and was sure he would tell it if it were properly led up to. It was a war, a sure enough war, but terribly one-sided. Men have no show when a woman, especially an unscrupulous one, gets after them. Women are clever, I admitted. This one was, and beautiful. Just about as wonderful a female as the devil ever made. Genesis states that she was made by another deity. Wrong, he cried. Man, perhaps, was made in the garden, but the woman was made below and crawled over the fence in the dark of the moon. Poor Adam. If he had only had enough sense to hit her on the head with a big stone and continued the race with some form of parthenogenesis, what a beautiful world it would have been. Let's toast these brave men who have, for all these centuries, fought so valiantly against so wily a foe, I suggested. We drained our glasses. Now, tell me the story, I urged. It was some 40 years ago when it started, he began. You were probably in high school at the time. Some of us in the trade thought of organizing an international association of bookbinders. There were 26 of us, all wealthy, young, and enthusiastic over fine books and their covers. The world was our market and playground, where we spent countless happy hours digging in musty book piles and museums as children dig in the beach sand. We were all single, except for the wedding with our art. We held meetings once a year, each in a different country, where we presented papers, exhibited specimens, and discussed all phases of our work and the latest discoveries. 1 week in every 52, spent in good fellowship, clean, wholesome, profitable pleasure. For 4 years we carried on the meetings. Then a woman applied for membership. It was at the London meeting. She came well introduced. It seemed impossible to justify a denial of the privilege for her to attend the meetings of the society. As a founder of the organization, I was able to prevent her from being elected to membership, even though some of the younger fellows thought I was wrong. They argued that so long as she was a bookbinder, she should be permitted to join. There was nothing in the laws to prevent a woman from becoming a member. I tried to amend the bylaws, but I was outvoted. So, there she was, a member. She turned up in Paris the next year with a lengthy paper all ready to read. I guess she knew how to bind a book. In fact, I was much later to know that she knew how. But some of the statements made in that paper were all but, if not wholly, impossible, and proved her to be a rank amateur. She was not the person to belong to our group of specialists. In the open discussion following the reading of her paper, we told her so. Man after man rose and explained to her exactly how much in error she was on this point and that. She waited till we were through with our criticisms, and then she said emphatically that she knew she was right because she owned an Encyclopedia Britannica, 26 volumes of it, and every statement she has made was in those 26 books, that we could discover for ourselves, if we would only trouble to do so. We laughed at the idea that a person could learn to bind a book, especially a fine, rare one, by reading the Britannica. Finally, we became silly about it and passed from simple laughter to masculine hee-hawing, and lastly, we were sarcastic. She sat stiffly, first flushed and then dead white. At last, rising, she said she would see us later on and walked unsteadily from the room. Some of the men realized then that they had behaved harshly and most unmannerly to a beautiful and earnest woman and tried to make amends. The next meeting was in Chicago. She failed to attend. 10 of our younger members likewise were absent. Just 16 of us were present. We were disturbed in a way, for always the response had been unanimous, and now so many were absent without any explanation. The following year in San Francisco, there were only 6 of us, and we were frankly astonished and discussed the possibility of disbanding. But I pleaded for unity and a continuance, for another year at least. Not one of the old crowd appeared at the meeting in my home in Boston. Not one. I decided they were all either married, dead, or fed up on the idea of an international association. Or perhaps they were too busy. But why not some word from some of them, especially those whom I had called friend? My host paused long enough to replenish the glasses, and I found I had been sitting rigidly, intent, as the story flowed from his lips. I was worried, he resumed, and decided to spend a few months and a bit of money seeking some of them out and try to discover the reason of the breaking up of our group. Investigation showed they had all followed the same pattern of behavior. All had done the same thing. One by one they had gone to Spain, and there all trace of them vanished. It all seemed very queer. I was all the more mystified when I returned to Boston and found a letter in a feminine hand from Spain. It was an invitation from the Lady Leonora Sonata to visit her. The reasons she gave were not too clear, merely that she was lonely and was desirous of my advice regarding some difficulty in her work. Would I please come if expenses and other financial matters were attended to? Perhaps I was tired and distressed. Anyway, my mind was not working very fast. However, at last I identified her. She was the bookbinder who had read such a foolish paper at the Paris meeting. But Spain? Spain? Why, all the rest of the boys had gone to Spain, and now I was being invited there. Why? And where were the other 25? Spain! However, I went. With my fingers crossed and knowing I was doing something foolish, I went to Spain. Not until I met her in her castle did I realize why I had gone. Once I saw her, I knew. I was in love with her. Realized I had been in love with her from the first time I had seen her. Oh, of course I was a fool, but I was younger then, and she was exquisitely beautiful and dainty as an elf. She entertained me delightfully. She sang like a lark and knew how to bedevil a man. We were very much alone. There seemed to be no servants. They must have been extraordinarily well trained, for surely there must have been some serving folk, but I never remember seeing any. From the first day after I drove my car into the courtyard of her castle to the day I drove out, we were alone. And as I remarked, she was very lovely and enticing. I cannot tell you what we talked about, but it must have been all of romance because, you see, I was in love, and I remember distinctly of telling her so. We swam in the cool, blue lagoon under the palms, both in the warm sunlight and the soft, sense-murdering light of the moon. And, lying on the white sands, her fragrant, tempting self close to me, I forgot my hatred of women. I thought no more of the mystery of the 25 bookbinders. All I could think of was that she was delectable and desirable, that I was young and in love. One night she was especially beautiful in a soft, misty gown which clung to her, revealingly, so that I was half mad with desire to crush her to me, never to let her go from my arms. She was particularly nice to me. Even yet, I can't remain calm as I remember. For she was sly and full of evil plotting even as she accepted my caresses, and we drank deeply of that rare old Spanish wine. At just what point I fell asleep, I don't, of course, know, but when I woke, I realized I had been drugged. My head was nearly splitting with pain, and I found myself face downward, spread-eagled, tied hand and foot to the four corners of one of her huge Spanish beds. And she sat there beside the bed, waiting for me to waken, still in that transparent gown, intensifying her ravishing beauty. Waiting for me to waken so that she might further torment me and talk to me. I didn't say anything, but I did a lot of thinking, especially about those other 25 bookbinders. It did not take her long to tell the story. It seems that after the Paris meeting, she had become dissatisfied with her Britannica. Not with the pages, but the bindings, which she decided to change. So, one at a time, she had invited the members of the association to visit her. Those men who had laughed at her. One at a time, she had driven them insane with her beauty and wiles. I well knew her ability. And one at a time, she had drugged them and tied them as she had me. Then, on their backs, she had tattooed in purple ink the words, Encyclopedia Britannica, Volume 1, or 2, 3, or 10, as the case may be. Careful lest she damage the skin, she removed the derma as a pelt from an animal, tanned it, and bound her volumes. One man's skin for each binding, and I was to serve as leather for the last one, Volume 26. Shivering, I laughed hollowly at my host. I had suspected all the time, and now I knew that he was either insane or the greatest liar of all time. "But the thing is impossible," I cried. "You cannot take enough skin off a man's back to bind a Britannica without killing him." "Who said she didn't kill them?" he retorted savagely. "Of course she killed them, and buried them. I saw the graveyard, with a name on the marker at the head of each grave. Perhaps you do not believe me? It is all true. She told me about it and then started to work on me. You saw my back in the bathhouse. She finished the title part of the last job. Do you want to see it in good light?" No thanks." I hastened to disavow any desire for further investigation and was ashamed of my suspicions. "I saw your back. The words Encyclopedia Britannica Volume 26 are there in purple ink and properly spaced, so if you were skinned, it would serve for a binding. But you know it really did not happen. Not the way you tell it. Such things don't occur these days." "I'll show you the books," he exclaimed, and flung open a bookcase. "There they are." I rose to examine them, all the titles in purple ink. I took one in my hand, felt its smooth leather. "I agree, I never saw leather like that before," I murmured. "Probably not, since it is made from human skin. Well, there in that case is all that is left of 25 friends." "It's a nice story," I said. "A nice, gentle bedtime story, but incomplete. You say 25 of your friends died. You were prepared for the last volume. Your back shows that. Yet, there is Volume 26, all bound like the rest. How about that?" "Look at it again," he urged. I picked it out and examined it carefully. "It is different," I cried incredulously. "It looks like the others, but the leather is finer, softer, of a different grain." "Certainly, it should be," he admitted, "for that last book is bound with female skin. That is all that is left of the seductive Lady Leonora Sonata." "No, you don't mean—" "Just that. She thought she was clever, but I outwitted her. She was very sure of herself. In an unguarded moment, she laid the scalpel too close to my fingers. I used it to turn the tables on her. I bound that last volume with her skin. Now I have all the society together. Gingerly, I replaced volume 26. There was a definite discomfort in the pit of my stomach. "And that is why you hate women with the vengeance you do?" I asked. "That's why," he laughed coldly. So coldly that I shook as with an ague. Whenever I feel there is a woman becoming interested in me, I come in here and look at my Encyclopedia Britannica in deluxe bindings. That was Bindings Deluxe by David H. Keller. When obsession turns to compulsion, not even skin is off limits.
Moral of the story? If your date invites you to see their private library and locks the door behind you, run. Maybe bring a lighter. Now we step into the realm of debts and vengeance, where ancient oaths echo louder than modern law.
Originally published in Weird Tales in 1943, this story contains racial language and themes that reflect the prejudices of its time. It should be heard with critical awareness.
From Seabury, Quinn, this is Repayment, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. I had a story from my friend Gansfield, whose acquaintanceship among the great, near great, and merely notorious of New York and its environments reads like a combination stone proof of the current issue of Who's Who and the 5-star edition of the Daily Tatler. We were finishing dinner at the Café des Courtiers in East 57th Street, where the fromage de brie is always at the precise, perfect point of ripeness, the steamed snails, lightly sautéed in olive oil, as sweetly tender as the first kiss of young love, and a slippery, thirst-annihilating Merceau, grateful as a wellspring in the desert. It was an evening in September, too warm for autumn, too cold for summer, the fitting ending to one of those radiant, vital, sun-swept days that New York knows in early fall, when twilight settles softly, like a lavender curtain dropped from the sky of pure dark amethyst, and blue haze trails across the distant Jersey Palisades, like the blue cloak of some proud queen. Dinner had been served in the garden, where orange, red, and green Chinese lanterns were half hidden among the plain tree leaves, and thick, soft grass made a carpet as soft as any from the looms of mossel underfoot. The subdued candlelight fell on the cloth and silver and glassware. Across the pointed yellow flames, I saw the pretty blonde hair and gray eyes of Frances Field and her husband's lean, tanned face, his sleekly brushed black hair, and the pencil line of his black, small mustache, muted like an echo from the street outside. There came the ululating warning of a motor siren, insistent but soft and musical as an ocarina played in the middle register. Frances shivered slightly. "Cold, dear?" Gans asked. Frances answered hesitantly, "I think so, if—" "Yes, dear? If you'll hold my hand, please? I'll feel safer that way. Not imagine dreadful things are slithering across the grass at me." "Righto, you ain't-y? Oh, soul of my soul's souls," agreed her husband, who speaks Arabic like a native of Dixieland, which he is. "Hang on for dear life. Here goes. We'd be best going in." Field smiled. He has a most engaging smile that tends to neutralize the effects of the grim things he sometimes says. The Beni Sanusi, the dark brotherhood of Berber sorcerers, hereditary magicians, snake charmers, and necromancers that has existed in North Africa since before the fall of Carthage, and flourishes today despite the interdiction of the Muslim mullahs and the French and Spanish administrators. The Berbers are not Arab stock, you know. They're a distinct racial group, sometimes like the Basques, and probably pre-Aryan. Outwardly, they're Muslimin, but that's a veneer laid on a core of folklore that has fire and serpent worship for its base. Not pleasant customers to tangle with. I should think not. And this friend of yours, Van whatever his name was, how'd he get mixed up with him? Well, he wasn't a friend of mine, Field corrected. I hardly knew the bloke to speak to, but I know all about him. And what's a motor horn that sounds like an ocarina got to do with it? I interrupted impolitely. Field and I don't stand on much ceremony with each other. Oh, that? Yeah, he drew one of the table candles to him and thrust the tip of his cigar into its cone of yellow flame. As a turban of white smoke came twisting from the cigar and twirled and spiraled around his head like ectoplasm in a spirit photograph. That'll take a lot of telling. Could you stand hearing it again, Fran? No, she denied, and smiled at him the way most men dream some women will someday smile at them. It was that motor siren. It made me think of Dirk Van Eyderstein, and... Oh, that, her husband chuckled. Don't let it get you down, darling. He only got what he asked for. Shoemakers ought to stick to their lasts, and young smart Alex from Long Island have no business mixing in the rites and ceremonies of the Beni Sanusi. The who? I asked. Field lit his cigar and settled in. Here goes. Dirk Van Eyderstein, it seemed, had been left about everything his thrifty Dutch ancestors had accumulated since the founding of the town of Breukelen in 1646, except their good, hard common sense. Born, as the saying goes, with a silver spoon in his mouth, he grew up into a spoiled brat, believing there was nothing his money couldn't buy, and encountering no evidence to weaken that opinion between his 5th and 13th birthdays. His classmates at the swanky country day school they sent him to fawned on him for his favors, and at prep school he had top place in the stag line and first choice of the girls. He cut in when he wished, but no one ever cut in on him. His father's gift to the athletic fund got him a place on the first team. That was the year Adelphi defeated Shoreham 50-0. At college, it was pretty much the same. If Dirk didn't make Phi Beta Kappa, he did make Rho Tau Epsilon, which had a lot more social significance, and to whose chapter house his father gave a completely equipped indoor squash court. When several of the boys blind-dated chorus girls, and Dirk found that the femme he'd drawn possessed less charm and beauty than the belle his roommate had, he calmly exchanged partners, and his roommate, mindful of the loans he'd made and those he hoped to make in the future, registered no complaint. Neither did the girl. She knew which side her bread was buttered on, and had the not unusual feminine desire to spread some sugar on the butter. And so, with his 13th birthday just across his shoulder, we find our little scion of Long Island aristocracy orphaned, and not grieving much about it, with very much more money than he knew what to do with, and a lifetime of complete unemployment before him. He looked 10 years younger than his age. His mouth had grown a little narrower, perhaps, but there were no lines in his forehead or about his eyes, no marks of victories or defeats. Immense boredom was pressing down on him like a cloud-loaded autumn sky. He was tired of gambling at the racetracks and casinos, wearied to the point of surfeit with a long succession of little gay ladies whose business in life it was to be amusing to rich young men. And so, on what might have been called an impulse, he went to Algiers for a week. The week stretched to a fortnight, and the fortnight lengthened to a month, and still he lingered. How he came to take the villa, he had no idea, but there he was, with a 3-month lease upon the place, a corps of native servants, and a chef de cuisine who was at least 3/4 French, rejoiced exceedingly in the name of Bonfoy, and made patisserie, which was, in its way, as much a work of art as are the pains of the Sainte-Chapelle. At first, he was enchanted with it all. He loved the flower-fresh, airy silence of the mornings before the sun had come out, hot and drowsy. He reveled in the long, sweet, quiet afternoons when overripe pomegranates lay like bleeding, broken hearts upon the turf-ringed flagstones of the garden paths, and sunlight poured a sort of pale, quiescent brightness over everything and took on iridescence from the mass of green leafage and brilliant hibiscus flowering riotously everywhere. But he was not a man to be content with merely contemplating beauty. Perhaps he had once had a sound mind, but a thing unused tends to deteriorate, and Dirk had never had to use his mind, so he was still a baby overtaken by manhood. And like an infant, he knew life and the world only through their impacts on his five senses. So the boredom which he fled caught up with him that evening early in December as he sat on the flat roof of his house and watched the sun go down like a full ball of crimson in a sea of swimming rosé, while in the turquoise east a single star showed sharp and bright as newly minted silver. "Ya Sidi," came the soft, insinuating voice of Othman Najim, his dragoman. "One waits below who carves admission to thy presence. He brings that which he hopes will amuse you." "What is it?" Dirk was slightly annoyed at the interruption of his idleness. The clown with a trained dancing ape, or one of those infernal sand diviners? "Oh," laughed the dragoman, who had a round and jolly face, a rounder, even jollier belly, and a laugh rounder, fatter, and jollier than either. "Is it with such trifles I would plague your lordship? I, Othman Najim? Not so, protector of the fatherless. The one who waits upon thy gracious nod is a snake master, a very prince of snake charmers, a member of the clan and tribe of the accursed Beni Sanusi, on whom be Allah's interdiction." He cast the imprecation perfunctorily, not as if he meant it, but because it was conventional. "Wilt deign to see him, O munificence?" "Humph. A snake charmer, eh? I've seen those Johnnies in the Casbah. Fakes, ain't they, working with fangless snakes? Well, not this one, Sidi. He is of the cursed tribe whose forebears worshipped at the serpent shrine before the prophet, Sallallahu alayhi Mesalim, converted them to Islam. 'Tis said the snakes know their blood brethren and will not bite them. However that may be, this fellow uses only deadly serpents from far behind, whose lightest kiss is sharp as the edged sword of the dark angel Azrael." "Oh, all right, bring the blighter up. He may be amusing." The prince of snake charmers Othman Najim ushered to the roof was old and wizened. Beneath the twisted green turban that marked him as a Haji who had made a pilgrimage to Mecca, his face was sharp and drawn, his cheek and jawbones standing out so startlingly they seemed almost to pierce the skin. A wisp of graying beard deepened from his chin, and on his upper lip a straggling line of gray mustache outlined the crooked smile that looked as if it might have been stitched on his mouth with red thread. "As-salam, ya Sidi." "Salute, my lord." He touched breast and lips and forehead in a flickering, almost incredibly quick gesture. "It is thy gracious wish that I have my pets dance before the presence." "Can you do tricks with them?" Despite himself, Dirk's interest was arrested by this strolling mountebank who wore his dignity and dirt with such an air of conscious pride. "Tricks?" The old man set a pot-bellied basket on the roof tiles. "Hiya, it is not a trick to force the servants that bear death within mouths to do thy will, Yasidi. What greater trick is there than to hold off the sunderer of all companionships and ender of delights by the power of the eye and flute, defender of the oppressed? Huh? Want me to believe you haven't had their fangs yanked out? Rahmat Allah, the Lord's compassion. Is thy servant a pork-devouring, wine-imbibing Hindu that he travels with emasculated serpents? Ya Abu Shud, the father of munificence. Wait until my pets, my dears, my roses from the garden of the king have danced for thee, defender of the defenseless, then say their fangs have been drawn, or no. Okay, start going, feller. I can't wait all night for you to get in the groove. The scrawny little man flopped down cross-legged on the roof tiles with all the bonelessness of a rag doll. Attend my voice, O gentle ones. Come to my call, ye brides and bridesmaids, ye scented bowers of delight. He jerked the cord with which the basket lid was fastened and rapped on the wadded lip of the hamper with a knuckle. His voice dropped to a gentler, wheedling tone. Come to thy lover, thy bridegroom, O ladies from the harem of the great king. Bye. Above the basket's open top, something had arisen like a nervous jack-in-the-box that jerked from sight almost as soon as it inhaled the outside air. Yet in the fleeting fraction of a second that it showed, Van Eiderstein had seen the glimmer of a pair of little bead-bright eyes, the outlines of a cone-shaped head, and the quick flicker of a forked tongue. A chill of sudden vague, indefinite fear went rippling up his spine, beginning at the small of his back and continuing until he felt the short hair on his neck commence to rise and bristle like the hackles of a startled dog. There was a chilled sensation in his forearms, and little bits of goose flesh dimpled in his skin. The age-old fear of every mammal for the serpent had laid hold on him. Oh, hell. Never mind the show tonight, old man. Take your snakes and run along. I'm not feeling so good. Like to rest. Behold, Yasidi. The old snake charmer's eyes were on him with a cold and terrible insistence. The serpents, they come to dance before thy presence, Father of perfection. Not hurriedly, but with a dreadful, graceful, slow deliberation, flowing effortlessly as water across the smooth rim of a basket, came 3 cobras with the shadows of the dying day reflected in their little, flat, unchanging eyes. The master of the serpents thrust a scrawny hand into his dirt-encrusted burnous and drew out a small instrument that looked like an onion with half a foot of stalk left on it. Along the upper side of the stem was a line of 6 holes like flute stops. His eyes were fixed upon the snakes with a fierce, burning steadiness. Dirk shivered at their expression. This was not the look a trainer gives his beasts, the cold, compelling gaze of one who bids another do his will. It was the look of one who worships unclean gods as he beholds his deity, who feels himself inspired by the godhead of the being he adores till votary and deity are one in thought and being, one in aim and purpose, and thought and aim and purpose wholly evil. The music of the pipe was sweet and flute-like, fluctuating from a slender spider web of high-pitched melody to the soft, throaty murmurs of doves busy with their courtship. It was all in minor key, the mourning, sad lament that stamps all Oriental music, yet underneath its sobbing, muted tones, there was an imitation of shrill, spiteful laughter. For a long moment the 3 snakes swayed to and fro as if they sought to find the source of the soft, liquid-flowing notes. Then slowly, lazily, their mottled bodies weaving languid andantes across the umber tiles, they slid toward the old piper squatting with his back against the parapet. Dirk saw the flicker of their lightning-forked, molasses-colored tongues as they slipped out of their coiled watchfulness and crept in slowly melting zigzags toward the musician, and beneath the liquid murmurs of the flute he heard the scratching of their belly scales against the tiles, like the scuffing of dry leaves that fly before a burst of autumn wind. They formed a semicircle around the piper, swaying pointed heads from right to left, from left to right. Now one of them raised half a yard of lichen-colored body from the floor. As it reared itself, the hood behind its head expanded slowly, and Dirk saw the spectacle-shaped mark of Brahma on it. The second snake was rising slowly, and the third. Unwillingly, they seemed to rise as though drawn from the floor by some force greater than their sluggish wills. But up and up they stretched, until it seemed that almost their full lengths were off the floor, and that they balanced on a scant half-foot of coiled tail. Faster came the music, rising in a shrill crescendo, till its piercing sharpness whipped against the ears like despairing screams, fluttering and wavering like a cry of eldritch terror, ornamented and embroidered with arpeggios until its melody was lost completely, then once more slipping back into its mournful, sobbing tune. "Their fangs, ye see." The piper took his flute from his lips for an instant. "Behold their mouths, and tell me that I lied through thee." As the shrill music paused, the serpents' mouths fell open, almost as if they gasped for breath, and, like grains of polished rice against the darkness of their gums, Dirk saw the glimmering of their poisoned fangs. The old man clapped his instrument against his mouth so quickly that it seemed the echo of his last note had not had a chance to fade, blew a final piercing sweet lament. "Hi-yo-boo!" he cried in a cracked, quavering voice. "The dance has ended, daughters of delight." Slowly, very slowly, like candles melting in intolerable heat, the serpents lost their rigor. They bent and swayed, lurched drunkenly, softened, wilted, and became limp and flaccid, lying upon the roof like half-deflated inner tubes, their little bead-bright eyes gone dull and lackluster. "My pets are tired," the old man said almost apologetically, and stooped to gather up his faintly quivering charges. "The dance sucks out their strength, protector of the bereaved." Dirk grinned derisively at him. "Oh, yeah? Have to be the seventh son of a sheik's seventh son before they'll dance for you, huh? Give me that pipe. I'll show you." He'd been watching the sheik charmer at his work, noting how he stopped the finger holes as he blew into his pipe. Years before he'd learned to play the ocarina, and this instrument, he figured, couldn't be so very different. The old devil would come alleging that his death-defying bunk was true, would he? Pretend it took a special talent to make trained snakes dance to music? He snatched the pipe from the old charmer's hand, put it to his lips, and blew into it. A low, soft, liquid note came from the bulb at its base. He drew a quick, deep breath and blew into the instrument again, and his fingers fell upon the stops as if by instinct. Slowly, softly, came the purling tones of an old tune. "The silver moon's a-shining in the heavens up above. Sleep, Kentucky, babe. Bismillah, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. In the name of the God of kind and compassionate. It is a fool's trick thou hast played, ye city." The old snake master chattered. "The snakes resent wrong charming. They will repay thee death for this insult." Already one of the serpents raised its head 5 inches from the roof, and as Dirk's music sounded softly through the gathering darkness, the other 2 twitched irritably, like sleepers awoken against their will. "In Allah's glorious name I take refuge." The old man seized the slowly bending bodies of his pets close to the heads and thrust them, writhing with faint rebelliousness, into his basket. "It is an evil thing that thou hast done this night, my lord. The serpents have lost face by dancing to a stranger's piping. Their pride is very great, and surely they will make repayment for the jest that thou hast played on them. Oh, get the hell out of here, and take your trick snakes with you." Dirk reached into his trouser pocket, found a silver 2-franc piece, and tossed it onto the towels. "Any time you'd like to have me put 'em through their paces, bring 'em around again." Astonishingly, the old man did not pounce upon the bouncing, clinking coin. "You cannot take it, Jasidi. It would be blood money. Allah abarik famur. God have thee in his keeping." Swinging his reed-woven basket like a fisherman who lugs a heavy catch, he shuffled to the stairwell, his heelless slippers slapping sorrowfully on the roof tiles. Dirk woke to a quick sense of apprehension. The night had been unusually sultry, and he had bidden Othman Najim bring a mattress and a silk sheet up from the house and spread them on the roof. Sleep had been a long time coming, but when it finally came, it was heavy as a drugged coma. Now it seemed an eerie dream had woken him, a dream that had to do with something heavy lying on his feet. He moved his left foot cautiously, experimentally. It felt oddly numb and stiff, as if the circulation had been stopped by some weight imposed on his ankle, and as he shifted underneath the sheet, he heard a lightly sibilating hiss, like steam escaping from a simmering kettle. In an instant, to the pre-dawn chill of dying night, there came the added iciness of mortal terror. He moved his foot another fraction of an inch, and the weight upon his ankle seemed to increase as it hardened, like the sudden knotting of a tensed muscle. The whispered warning hiss was sharper, more insistent. The moonlight blocked out halftones. Objects had the stark clarity of things drawn on a blackboard, and he could see the rope-like body coiled upon his legs, rocking gently to and fro as if swayed in a light breeze. Its hood was up. Its forked tongue flickered like a flash of sable light. Its little, flat, hard eyes gleamed dully in the black head like a pair of tarnished cut-steel buttons. Horror touched the very marrow of his soul. His stomach felt stiff and empty. Stark panic clawed at him, and terror seemed to drain his will. His blood seethed, churning in his ears, and every hurrying, frantic pulse beat struck his brain like a trip-hammer blow. The strokes seemed to arrange themselves in a rhythmic sequence. The formed words chattered in a gleeful, high-pitched voice. The snakes resent wrong charming, Yazidi. They will repay thee death for thy insult to them. Could it be the cobra had come back to take revenge for his silly prank? That, as the old man warned, no one not of the guild of snake charmers might make serpents dance to his piping and live to boast of it? It had seemed fantastic, even childish, when the old snake master mouthed his admonition. But now, he took the corners of the heavy silk sheet in his hand and raised them gently, slowly, slowly. If he could make a shield of the tough fabric, let the snake drive into it. With a mad convulsive twist, he drew his feet up, raised the silken rug for a screen, and rolled sideways as a streak of black lightning whipped at his throat. The scream that stabbed the morning silence was stark terror made articulate. It rose and rose until it seemed no human throat could stand the strain of it. Then, with a bubbling, choking sob, it stopped abruptly. There was no question of the cause of death. The little punctures in the neck just where the jugular comes near the surface were diagnostic of snakebite, and the report of Dr. Charles Auguste Renard, the police surgeon who performed the autopsy, left no room for quibbling. The toxin had spread with lightning-quick rapidity, for it had struck directly into the external jugular. It was undoubtedly that of the Indian cobra, Naja tripidians, as the advanced state of deterioration of the central nervous system and the hemolytic condition of the blood attested. Non-medical phases of the case are recorded in the voluminous precis of Etienne Hercule Jean-Baptiste Duval, Brigadier de Police, who had charge of the investigation. With a corps of native gendarmes, he had made a thoroughgoing search of the house and garden. No place where any snake, even the greatest smallness, could find lodgment had been overlooked. There was no trace of any sort of kind of serpent in the house or grounds, nor even any hole where one the size of an earthworm could find a lair which they had not investigated with the most painstaking care. Non-emphaticquement. He, Etienne Hercule Jean-Baptiste Duval, Brigadier de Police, would personally certify to that. Vraiment. How came the serpent on the housetop, and whither had it vanished when it had killed Monsieur l'Américain to death then? Ah, bah. Why put such abstruse questions to him? After all, he was but a simple policeman, not le bon Dieu. But no. That was Repayment by Seabury Quinn. Some debts are generational, and some collectors have eternity to come calling.
When history refuses to stay buried, you'd better hope your ancestors left a clean trail behind them.
Our next tale is a fever dream of tigers, sages, and kingdoms buried deep beneath the earth. A journey through myth and mortality.
This story contains racial tropes and characterizations common to Orientalist fiction of the 1940s. It is shared here for historical and critical consideration.
From Frank Owen, this is Quest of a Noble Tiger, performed by yours truly, Otis Jiry. The thing plunged downward like a dark star falling to earth. A moment before, it being Richard Trent, a Yankee flying for China. Then, in the space of a trembling of a leaf, machine gun bullets had shattered the night-still blackness. His gasoline caught fire, and the Tomahawk was enveloped in flames. In a split second, he had jumped clear of the plane, striking his head sharply as he did so. He was unconscious before he could pull the ripcord of his parachute, and so he dropped through space, unaware that his body was hurtling toward the dust of a parched earth. His plane had been flying at 18,000 feet. The air was bitingly cold, and it served as a stimulant to revive him. He opened his eyes. Down, down, down he plunged. It was difficult for him to gather his thoughts. His brain was in chaos. Memory eluded him. His hand went mechanically to the ripcord, and the parachute opened like a white cloud above him. Against the sky, it had a luminous quality, reflecting the starlight. There was no moon. A strong wind was blowing, stalling his descent. Often he drifted many miles, though he was in no condition to calculate direction. Nevertheless, he was aware that he was drifting, but he wasn't alarmed. He'd been flying at approximately 300 miles per hour when his plane was attacked. Before leaping into space, he had cut down the speed. His head ached viciously, and blood was trickling down his face from a gash in his forehead. The wound gave him no pain, otherwise he was uninjured. Only that sharp headache annoyed him. It nauseated him, but the cold air felt good against his forehead. Occasionally, the descent of the parachute would be arrested by a sudden vicious upswing of a wind channel, as though Quan Yu, the god of war, was striking out with his fists, flaying the very air itself, even as the entire earth was being churned by his huge iron heels. Once the parachute collapsed and billowed around his head, for he was falling upward, but as it enshrouded him like folds of white cloud, he abruptly plunged downward again at a terrifying speed. Once more the parachute mushroomed, and his descent was gentle and reasonably calm. But now he noticed a strange phenomenon. Silently, one by one, the stars were disappearing into a terrifying void of blackness. There was little dampness in the air despite its coldness, so no storm was approaching. Yet the stars continued to be blotted out, as though they were white flowers, and the gentle smiling god of longevity walked about the blue meadows of the sky, gathering them as he went. Soon, all color and brilliance were gone from the night, and only bleak, desolate blackness remained. Man drinks light with the atmosphere, so it was that Richard Trent's mouth felt parched, dry. It drove the moisture from his throat until he could not have needed a drink more if he had been in a Gobi sandstorm. But one single star, visible in the dark, would have slaked his thirst. Meanwhile, the descent had become more rapid. The cold grew less penetrating, but the peril seemed to increase. For months, Richard Trent had been a flying tiger. His exploits were world news. He had faced death in its cruelest forms without flinching. He had laughed in the face of danger, yet now he was afraid when there was nothing to fear. Afraid of blackness when he had crept about Chinese villages, feeling his way along, not even a candle visible, and had never given it a thought. Now, without reason, horror, biting, incredible, was eating into the very marrow of his bones. How long he could have stood the suspense of an unknown terror, as though he were falling into a deep pit and the earth were closing in, is problematical, had his descent not abruptly ceased. He struck with a jolt, and the parachute dragged him along a few feet. Even in the blackness, he found no difficulty disentangling himself. Thereafter he lay prone, endeavoring to draw his scattered wits together. As he lay there, gradually the panic abated. Even the air was calm, devoid of evil spirits. Fool that he was! Flying tiger! Bah! No flying tiger could have nerves like that. Yet the unknown has ever been fearsome since the first man trod gingerly upon a strange new world. Nearby he could hear the sound of a river splashing and gurgling along, a swift current that had little of the eerie about it. He was lying so close to it that occasionally a few drops splashed upon his face. For a moment he had the intense desire to rise and leap into it, ending his farce of terror, but for some unknown reason, he refrained. However, he could not move far because of the danger of falling into the subterranean river or a rock crevice. At the start, he uttered a cry that echoed and danced over the rocks as it sped into the distance. What if he had fallen into an extinct volcano? It would not be discovered in 1,000 years. Then reason reasserted itself. Wherever this spot may be, it was not within an extinct volcano, for the air was delightfully fresh and cool. Besides, a volcano is never extinct. It merely accidentally gets corked up by the force of its own spew. He rolled over and lay on his back, waiting for daylight or whatever might come. And now, above him, he could see the stars through a narrow ribbon of light, and they cleansed his mind of the last vestige of fear. Whatever it was, he'd face it. He was curious, too. Adventure always has a pleasing expression. Since the air was so clean, he was in no danger of suffocation. The water of the river was probably fresh, so he was in no danger of thirst. Before hunger could overtake him, he'd been able, perhaps, to climb back into the world of men once more. Without doubt, he had fallen into a mighty crevice in the rocks, though why the air was so sweet to breathe, well, that was an enigma. Why was it not fetid and vile if the walls were narrow and filled slightly with the sweepings of the wind? He felt about him. The rock was smooth as marble road that was kept in good repair, but there was no vestige of sand, neither were there dead leaves. Evidently, nearby there must be an entrance to this cavern with a skylight window. He had the feeling that people were in the vicinity. He was not alone. His courage returned to him. Gone were the stupid fears that had momentarily gripped him. He stretched out and yawned. He longed for a cigarette, and even though he had a pack with him, he made no attempt to light one. Better to wait till daylight before doing so. It was never wise to attract attention, even though he felt he was not in hostile territory. His natural caution exerted itself. A cigarette attracts enemy fire. Why make a target of oneself? The sweetest morsel of life is that which a man tastes when he's in danger. Somehow he had no regrets. This was an adventure. Perhaps he had run across, or rather fallen into a natural air raid shelter that nature had kindly equipped for just such an emergency as China was facing. Why, it even had clear, fresh running water. He smiled ruefully. What a pity if it should prove to have no exit. Still, the thought brought him no dismay. He could see the stars above. If there were no other means of egress, he'd journey to the stars. The solitude was friendly. Perhaps the belief that all was well was only an illusion, but illusion was a sweet-tongued voice. It lulled him to sleep without his knowing, and in his sleep He dreamed that a voice kept whispering to him over and over again, "This is the hour of mist feeding." He awakened, much refreshed. Curiously, he gazed about him. Perhaps this too was a dream, for he was lying in a comfortable bed in a luxuriously silken-draped yellow room in which a single lantern burned with a cheerful, subdued glow. It was a room in which one might give oneself over to the enjoyment of solitude.